Nature is supposed to be ruthlessly efficient. That is the story most people carry about how evolution works. The strong survive. The fit reproduce. The well-designed bodies outcompete the poorly designed ones, and over millions of years the biological world becomes a showcase of elegant solutions to survival problems. The wing optimized for its purpose, the eye calibrated precisely to its environment, the immune system tuned to the specific threats in the ecosystem it evolved in. The whole process is supposed to be a kind of optimization engine. Brutal, yes. Amoral, certainly. But efficient, rational. Moving always toward better design. It does not always work that way. Evolution does not reward good design. It rewards reproduction. And those two things are frequently, sometimes spectacularly, not the same. Across the biological world there are traits that spread through populations not because they make individual organisms healthier, longer-lived, or more elegantly built, but because they happen to produce more offspring in the specific conditions of the moment. The trait does not need to be good. It does not need to be efficient. It does not need to make any sense from the perspective of the individual carrying it. It needs only to reproduce more than the alternative. And what reproduces more than the alternative in the specific environmental context of selection is what nature rewards, regardless of what it costs, regardless of what it looks like, regardless of whether any intelligent designer would have chosen it. These are 5 of the cases where nature rewarded something that by almost any reasonable standard looks wrong. The peacock's tail is the example that started the conversation. Charles Darwin himself found it disturbing. In 1860 he wrote that the sight of a feather in a peacock's tail made him feel sick whenever he looked at it, because he could not see how natural selection could have produced something so apparently counterproductive. The tail is enormous. It makes the peacock slower. It makes it more visible to predators. It costs significant metabolic resources to grow and maintain. Every measurable survival metric is worse for the peacock with the longest, heaviest, most elaborate tail. And yet those tails spread and elaborated and became more extreme over millions of years because female peacocks preferred them. The females who mated with the most elaborate tails produced sons with elaborate tails who were preferred by the next generation of females. The trait that made the peacock worse at surviving made it better at reproducing. And in the evolutionary accounting, reproduction is the only currency that counts. This is what biologist Amotz Zahavi at Tel Aviv University formalized as the handicap principle in the 1970s. A trait can be an honest signal of genetic quality precisely because it is costly. A peacock carrying a metabolically expensive tail and still surviving is demonstrating a genuine surplus of biological quality, excess resources, robust health, good parasite resistance, that the tail cost cannot fully consume. The most extravagant tail is the most honest advertisement, because only a genuinely high-quality individual can afford to carry it. The female is not making an irrational choice. She is reading a signal that, despite appearances, contains real information. But the individual peacock is still paying a survival cost that would look, from the outside, like a design flaw. Nature rewarded the wrong body, and the wrong body became the standard. The second case goes deeper into the biology of conflict between organisms that should theoretically be on the same side. In most mammalian pregnancies, the mother and the developing embryo share a fundamental biological interest, the embryo's survival, but they do not share identical interests. The mother's long-term reproductive fitness is served by allocating resources across multiple offspring across her lifetime. The embryo's genetic interest is served by extracting as many maternal resources as possible right now. These interests are partially aligned and partially in direct conflict, and the embryo, it turns out, is not passive. Evolutionary biologist David Haig at Harvard University has documented what he calls the evolutionary conflict of pregnancy, the finding that fetal cells actively manipulate maternal physiology to redirect resources toward themselves. Trophoblast cells from the embryo invade the maternal blood vessels and chemically modify them to reduce the mother's ability to constrict blood flow to the placenta. The embryo is essentially hijacking the maternal circulatory system to make it harder for the mother to limit the resource supply. Morning sickness, gestational diabetes, elevated blood pressure, conditions that look like pregnancy complications. appear in Haig's framework as the visible evidence of an ongoing biological negotiation between two organisms with overlapping but not identical interests. Nature did not design a harmonious system. It produced two competing sets of adaptations that happened to produce a baby most of the time as a byproduct of their conflict. The third case is the one that most directly dismantles the idea of nature as a wise optimizer. The recurrent laryngeal nerve in most vertebrates travels from the brain to the larynx, a journey of a few inches in most animals. In the giraffe, that same nerve travels from the brain down the full length of the neck to a ganglion near the heart, and then back up the full length of the neck to the larynx, a journey of approximately 15 feet to connect two structures that are separated by a few inches. The nerve takes this absurd detour because in the ancestral vertebrate, the structures it connects were in the chest, and as the neck elongated over millions of years of evolution, the nerve could not reroute itself. It could only extend along the path it already had. Evolution cannot redesign from scratch. It can only modify what already exists, and what already existed committed the giraffe's laryngeal nerve to a 15-foot journey, for no functional reason that could not have been solved with a 2-inch connection. This is not a design. This is the accumulated consequence of millions of years of modifications to a body plan that was never designed at all. Nature rewarded the giraffe that could reach higher leaves. It did not care about the nerve. The fourth case is the one that makes the viewer's own biology feel immediately strange. Wisdom teeth. The human jaw evolved in ancestral populations that ate significantly tougher diets, raw meat, unprocessed plant material, foods that required the kind of chewing that wore teeth down significantly across a lifetime. A third set of molars arriving in early adulthood was useful in that environment, because by that age many of the original molars had worn substantially. The jaw that evolved for that diet was also larger than the modern human jaw, sized to accommodate the full complement of teeth without crowding. As human diet changed and skulls evolved, the jaw shortened while wisdom teeth kept arriving on the original schedule programmed into human developmental biology. The result is a third set of molars arriving in a jaw that frequently has no room for them, requiring surgical removal in approximately 85% of people in industrialized populations. Nature rewarded the jaw that produced extra molars in an environment that no longer exists. The reward is now a liability, but evolution moves too slowly to fix it. The programming that produces wisdom teeth is still running in bodies that have moved on from the environment that made it useful, because evolution does not anticipate future environments, it only responds to past ones. The fifth case is the most personal and the most difficult to sit with. Human childbirth is, by the standards of most other mammals, extraordinarily dangerous. The combination of a large-brained infant and a bipedally narrowed pelvis produces a passage that is tightly matched to the infant's head size, so tightly that the infant must rotate during delivery in a way that no other primate requires. Evolutionary anthropologist Wenda Trevathan at New Mexico State University has documented that human infants emerge from the birth canal facing away from the mother, unlike virtually every other primate, where infants emerge facing toward the mother and can be guided and supported by her own hands. The human infant's rotational emergence requires assistance. Human birth, uniquely among primates, appears to have required the presence of other people, social birth assistants, from the earliest stages of anatomically modern human evolution. The large brain that made humans the most cognitively capable species on the planet simultaneously made the birth of each new human the most dangerous reproductive event of any primate. Nature rewarded the brain. It did not reward the pelvis that had to accommodate it. The result is a compromise that costs more human lives in childbirth than the equivalent process costs in any of our closest evolutionary relatives. The reward was real. The cost was paid by the body that carried it. If the idea that evolution rewards what reproduces rather than what is good is changing how you think about your own biology, I make content like this every week and would genuinely appreciate it if you subscribed. What connects these 5 cases is the same principle operating at different scales in different systems. Evolution is not an optimizer. It is an accumulator. It accumulates whatever survives long enough to reproduce in the specific conditions of the specific moment. The peacock tail that makes individual survival harder. the embryo that hijacks maternal physiology, the nerve that travels 15 feet to cover 2 inches, the wisdom teeth that arrive in jaws that have moved on, the brain that made birth dangerous. All of these were rewarded not because they were good, but because they happened to produce more copies of themselves than the alternatives that existed at the time. This is not a failure of the system. It is the system working exactly as it works. Selection pressure applies to what is available in the current environment against the current alternatives. It cannot plan ahead. It cannot see the giraffe's neck growing longer and reroute the nerve preemptively. It cannot anticipate the change in human diet and scale back the wisdom tooth programming. It cannot balance the reproductive advantage of brain size against the obstetric cost. It responds. It accumulates. It moves in the direction of more reproduction, regardless of what that direction costs the bodies doing the reproducing. Which means the question worth sitting with is not why nature sometimes produces bad design. It is why we ever assumed that nature was designing for anything other than continuation. The bodies around you, your own body, the bodies of every living thing, are not the winners of an optimization competition. They are the current survivors of a process that rewards whatever happened to reproduce more than the alternative in conditions that may no longer exist. They are good enough for right now. They carry the accumulated compromises of every environment their lineage passed through, and they will continue accumulating compromises as long as they continue reproducing. The question that stays is a personal one. Which parts of your own body and your own behaviour are the peacock's tail costly signals carrying information you are still broadcasting to an audience that may or may not exist in the form your biology assumes? And which parts are the recurrent laryngeal nerve, 15-foot detours through your psychology and your neurology and your social responses, running the long route for reasons that made sense in a world your ancestors left behind long before you arrived in it?